Hi, my name is Madeline and welcome to my purple clouds tutorial. While I get my watercolor paper taped down to my desk, I want to quickly go over our supplies. Feel free to pause the video to take a closer look at the supplies. I'll be using Bao Hong watercolor paper. For the sky, I'll be using a mixture of ultramarine pink, violet, lilac, some permanent rose, dioxazine purple, and I'll be painting the clouds with some Dr. P.H. Martin's bleed proof white, as well as some ultramarine and smalt blue. I use a little bit of yellow ochre and burnt sienna for the warmth that we see in the bottom of the photo, and I primarily use Escoda Ultimo brushes around 6, around 10, and an Escoda Perla around 6. Now that my paper is all taped down, I'm going to grab my Princeton modeler brush and I'm going to wet our paper because we're going to start our background wash wet on wet, and the best way to get our sky colors to really blend together well without any hard lines is to paint a background wash wet on wet. This is the reference photo that we're going to be painting from today, and we will be tackling those fluffy dark clouds in the foreground together. I'm going to start off by grabbing some ultramarine pink and mixing it in with some leftover dioxazine purple on my palette, and we are going to paint the upper part of our sky first, which is a little bit lighter than the clouds at the bottom. Now I'm mixing a little bit of yellow ochre and burnt sienna to create that warm yellow that we see on the bottom. So right now I'm using my Escoda Ultimo brush. The Escoda brushes have many different lines of brushes, and the Ultimo line is its softest, most absorbent line. Now I'm going to grab a little bit of permanent rose, and I'm just going to add a little bit of warmth to the center of our photo right here. Now I'm going to grab a little bit more ultramarine pink, and we are going to start painting the fluffy clouds on the upper right corner. I'm going to get a pretty creamy consistency of paint, and I'm just going to make kind of like really short brush strokes like you see me doing. We want the paint to be on the thicker side, otherwise it's just all going to run together. Now I'm grabbing some dioxazine purple and I'm going to paint another section of clouds right in front of the one that we just did. And I'm using circular motions with my brush stroke, washing my brush, I'm dabbing off that excess paint and water, and then I'm going to use that to sort of shape the cloud. And what I'm doing is just sort of going over the edges and giving the cloud more definition. Now I'm grabbing some lilac. This is an opaque kind of pastel purple, and I'm painting a cloud kind of just below what we just painted. And again, I'm washing my brush and cleaning off the water, and I'm sort of just blurring that very bottom edge. And by blur, what I mean is I'm taking my brush that I've rinsed of paint and water, and I've also dabbed off the excess water onto that paper towel, and I'm just taking that clean brush and I'm sort of going over the kind of like stringier parts of the paint that we see when we paint wet on wet. And then that leaves us with like a really soft edge that to me looks kind of like blurred. Now I'm going to grab a very creamy consistency of purple, primarily dioxazine purple, and we're going to start working on that really big chunk of purple clouds in the foreground. And so this is wet on dry, and I am actually going to do this part relatively quickly because I want to create depth with my clouds while this is all still wet. So I'm sort of just painting the shape of the cloud. I'm filling it in. I'm going to add a little bit more color to the very bottom right, and then I'm going to use my brush. I'm going to rinse it off of paint. I'm going to lift some of the parts of the clouds to sort of create some depth. So you'll see after I wash my brush off, I dab off the excess water, and then I'm just going to lift some of the purple right here, and we're going to continue to lift some parts of the cloud so that we sort of get that depth. So right after I lift a little bit of color, I'm going to rinse the brush and rinse off that color. I'm going to go back in and I'm going to lift a little bit more. The key here is to not introduce a lot of water because that's going to create a watercolor bloom on our wet paint right now. Our mountain is still wet. That's how we can do this. And when I'm lifting, I'm basically sort of just erasing some of the watercolor that I've laid down initially. And so I'm sort of just kind of like making little scrubbing circular motions to get that paint out. I'm dropping in some ultramarine violet to sort of create that contrast with the lighter parts that we just lifted. Now I'm going to switch over to my round 6 Ultimo brush. Now I'm going to grab some white gouache and we are going to add some white to our cloud. I'm adding white gouache because I feel like it helps create more of that texture. I feel like when you're lifting really dark color, it can be hard to get as much lightness as you want, and so this is just kind of like a shortcut trick. Now I'm going to take the round 6 brush and I am going to sort of blur that really sharp line that we see at the edge of our cloud. And this is only going to work when the paint is still wet, and so that's partly why I tried to work really fast so that we could get to this step. And when I say blur, we're kind of like lifting, we're taking a clean wet brush and we're just sort of scrubbing on that sharp line. So I really like how this cloud came out, and we are going to dry this layer. Now I'm going to grab my liner brush and some neutral tint. And if we look at the reference photo again, there's like a really nice flock of birds right here at the center of the reference photo. And so that's what we are going to paint right now. The key to painting birds is to use a synthetic liner brush that's very thin and doesn't hold very much water. It has a really good snap, and to use a very diluted mixture of either neutral tint or Payne's Gray or Indigo. And then now I'm going to grab my bleed proof white gouache again. I'm going to grab a Escoda Perla brush. A Perla brush is their very synthetic line brush. It doesn't hold very much water, but has a very sharp tip. I am painting a circle, and then I guess my favorite or my go-to way to paint moons like this is I like to fill in a circle with some white paint, and then I grab a clean paper towel, and then I sort of dab at it while it's still wet, and you kind of get that nice like faded moon texture. So I'm going to grab some paper towel right now, and I'm just going to dab at it and pick up some of that white paint, and then you kind of get like that, like you can see right now, that light moon texture. And I do it a couple of times. So now I'm going to come back with some more white gouache. I'm going to darken some areas, and then I'm going to lift, and I kind of do this back and forth until the moon looks like how I want it to. And then once it looks like how I want it to look, I dry the moon. And that's it for this landscape. Once everything's dry, we can peel our masking tape off. And I really love how soft and fluffy our clouds came out. I personally really struggle with clouds, so I hope that that you enjoyed this tutorial and that it wasn't too stressful, I hope. If you liked this tutorial, please hit the like button. It's a really small way to help my channel grow. And if you enjoy my content, use the following QR codes to either find me on Patreon or Instagram.